We finally have an update on the Dior case, with Dior pledging $2.3 million to help with the issue. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, Dior was put under investigation after a factory in Italy that makes their bags was found to be violating labor laws. The workers were made to work longer than their legal hours, paid less than the minimum wage, some were undocumented workers without rights, and the workers were forced to sleep in the factory, with the factory also being seen as a front for other illegal businesses. This, of course, is the same investigation in which it was found that Dior book totes cost 53 euros to assemble, which became a massive story on social media and beyond. Ultimately, nothing substantial came from the case because Dior is not legally liable for the actions of a third-party manufacturer that they work with. So they aren't liable for, labor violations that happened with one of their manufacturing partners, and therefore they weren't legally culpable themselves to any sort of wrongdoing. It's very similar to the case with Valentino, in the case that they are kind of under investigation and these courts were overseeing that Dior improves the practices in these places. And Dior, as part of closing the case, has actually pledged to do a few things. One of those things is committing to paying $2.3 million over 5 years to support initiatives aimed at helping victims of labor exploitation. They also committed to making changes to their ethical and social responsibility statements and to adopt stricter procedures to select and monitor suppliers. Do I believe that they're going to have stricter procedures to monitor suppliers? No. We've seen evidence very recently with the Valentino case, which is in the last video. You guys should definitely check it out if you're interested, where essentially Valentino were made aware of the labor practices, but they turned a blind eye to what was going on because, of course, the cash was coming in. And with a lot of these big companies and big conglomerates, cash is king. And this is why I certainly agree with the people that were saying the investigation's outcome was way too lenient. If brands think they can get away with all this stuff, of course they'll continue to do it. To be very honest, it is a slap on the wrist for Dior to be paying $2.3 million, but it is also very important to note that Dior didn't even have to pay that. They weren't legally culpable for any of it, to be honest. They just kind of wanted to pay to kind of help with their image, and it looks like they're doing something, but by Dior standards, $2.3 million is literally nothing. It is nothing. These are companies that have marketing budget in the tens and hundreds of millions a year. So yeah, it's insane. So with all these cases coming out, my question to myself is, where exactly do we go from here? What has to happen for a lot of these things to end? It's quite common that luxury brands often outsource production to multiple suppliers because it's very, very difficult to have your own factories to supply with the scale that a lot of these luxury brands produce in. But the only problem with that is it creates layers of uncertainty that makes it difficult to, attribute any direct responsibility for labor violations on these brands. This complexity also enables brands to distance themselves from any exploitative practices while continuing to benefit from lower production costs. And I think that's a big issue because luxury brands can very easily just, when the issues come, when the legal violations come, they can just be like, yep, this has nothing to do with us. And then the second that, it's time to make money again, they can just go to a different supplier. Who cares what happens to the supplier before, So they will always, so long as the legislation doesn't change, they'll always not be legally culpable for any of these issues. I think it's also very, very important to note that a lot of luxury conglomerates hold a lot of political power. You have to think that a lot of these luxury conglomerates employ so many people. They're responsible for a lot of income that comes into a country. They're responsible for a lot of the trade that happens in a country. So because of the economic importance of a lot of these conglomerates, they have a lot of political power where governments sometimes are a bit scared to punish them for anything because they're scared that the kickback could be that they move production elsewhere, they move a lot of money elsewhere, and that could really affect the local economy. Therefore, they just have so much leeway when it comes to legal things. And I think that's a big issue. I think that needs to change. You have to think it would be a political headache in a situation where less people have jobs, they're making less in tax revenue from these companies. Because I know that a lot of conglomerates, they evade tax, obviously. They find very creative ways of not paying tax. But they can't really completely avoid tax because you need to remember that they still have to pay tax on behalf of their employees. So even if they're not paying their, corporate tax, they're still paying tax on each employee. And that's a lot of income. If you think of the likes of LVMH, how many people they employ in France and Italy and stuff like that. Can you imagine if governments aren't receiving all the tax income from, the incomes of these people? That's a lot of money, like a lot of money. So it makes sense why these conglomerates can just do whatever they like in these countries. And to be honest, when I think of this issue, it's so many factors. It's not just even about, fashion needs to be better, the quality needs to be better, these brands are cutting corners, luxury has lost its luster. We're in a situation where a lot of these luxury brands charge insane prices, but the quality is going down. They cut corners at every point because their business model is predicated on them making more money every single quarter and increasing profits every single quarter. And when that's your business model, if you can use cheaper lining, you'll do it. If you can use cheaper leather, if you can use cheaper hardware, cheaper zips, cheaper, any sort of element to the garment, if you can make it cheaper. And I think that it's leading to this overall destruction of fashion as a whole. I've made videos in the past that has talked about how fashion across the board, whether that's fast fashion, luxury fashion, all of it is a lot worse now than it was before, which is always insane to me because as human beings and as a society, we are supposed to be progressing. We're supposed to be moving forward. We're not supposed to be in a situation where things are getting worse. Technology is advancing. Why is garment quality going down? But it's because a lot of garment quality is predicated on slow processes. And unfortunately, in an economy where everything is about speed, everything is about pushing things to market as fast as possible, selling things as fast as possible, that doesn't really align with what is required to make garments to a very high standard. A good example, when you're processing a lot of factories, when they are processing the likes of cotton or any sort of fabric, you have a choice to dry it the natural way. And if you dry it naturally, it will take a long time. However, the drying process will not damage the fibers. However, what you can do is blast these garments with loads of heat to dry them quickly in the treatment process. And that's a way that you can, bring these fabrics to market a lot faster. But what does that heat do? It damages the fibers and it really taints the quality of the fabric. So this is a big reason why quality is going down. It's at every single point in time. Everything is all about profit and it's all about speed. And to address these issues, I feel like stricter legislation and enforcement mechanisms are so necessary. Governments really need to impose meaningful penalties on brands that violate labor laws. In the case of this Dior case, there should have been way more substantial fines. There should have been mandatory public reporting around what exactly they're doing to improve these processes. Yes, publicly they've said that they're making steps, whatever that means, to improve their, labor violations and making sure that these don't happen with a lot of their manufacturing partners. But what does that actually mean? Let them show us publicly the exact steps they're taking to rectify these issues. It would also be amazing if brands had to disclose their auditing details, like the details of the audits and exactly what happens with the audits. I think that would be a great step in pushing these brands to do the audits properly, one, and two, for us to be able to scrutinize exactly how these audits take place. And therefore, they would almost be forced into doing it better. The process would be forced into being better because so many eyeballs would be on it. And of course, it would be great if they could also do more things when it comes to the supply chain. I remember years ago, we were talking about blockchain being used in fashion where you can really trace the origin of a garment. Luxury fashion's use of blockchain initially, from my understanding, was they wanted to use it more for authentication reasons so that you know what you've bought is original, more so than, them actually wanting to be transparent about their supply chain and stuff like that. But if it could be mandated that they have to use those kind of blockchains for the use of us being able to trace and to have good traceability of the origin of a garment, that would be fantastic. But once again, these things are way more complicated than it seems because, like I've said, they have way too much lobbying power. They hire way too many people. They're responsible for so much money in the country that I just don't see how any sort of government would want to hold people accountable. I mean, for God's sake, when you looked at the inauguration of Trump, Bernard Arnault was right there, right beside Trump. I mean, when he made the factory in Texas, he had great tax breaks that he was given via Trump. So once again, these things are a lot harder to do in practice, but I'd love to know what you guys think. Of course, if you guys want more content and detailed content like my fashion book club that I have, you can subscribe to my Patreon, or you can subscribe to the channel memberships. The link will be in the description below. But on that note, I'll see you guys in the next video.